midst of the scary season where lots of kids and teens and even adults are telling ghost stories by flashlight or queuing up horror flicks on their favorite streaming services. But sometimes our scares creep up on us. Here we are, minding our own business, watching what we think is a nice little movie about rabbits or deer or toasters, and bam, something truly terrifying leaps out of the screen and goes boo. If we're kids, we feel like we'll never sleep soundly again. And if we're parents of scared kids, we might wonder the very same thing. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Plugged In Show. We'll be talking about those unexpected frights on film, be they dancing elephants or flying monkeys or who knows what else. How can parents help walk their kids through these unintentionally scarring scenes? And since we're talking about scarring, we'll turn our attention to a movie that's all about how hard it is to deal with old wounds. We're talking about Exhibiting Forgiveness, a movie with tons of Christian content, more than its fair share of swearing, and some deep, difficult themes. And then we'll be launching a shiny new game that may generate some scars of its own, because it'll involve a lot of arguing.
Oh, good.
I know.
I love that.
It's like our
I can't
dream,
wait
right?
to win.
Oh, my goodness. We'll see about that. And who is joining us for this wide-ranging show? Of course, Adam Holz, who you've already heard, and Kennedy Unthank. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello.
So I've got a really obvious question for you. Since we're talking about unexpected frights in film or on TV, I want to know what scared you as a child from the screen. What really messed you up? Kennedy, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I actually had three that I was thinking of. One of which was, I don't think anyone considers it a kid's movie, but Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Ooh. When he dips the shoe into the dissolving liquid. That was freaky.
That is freaky.
But one that is more oriented towards kids, I would probably say The Never-Ending Story.
Oh.
It was the song that just went on
Oh, yeah.
on and on.
Well, when Artax drowns in the Swamp of Sadness. Ooh. I was a child watching a horse drown, and it was just like, oh my, this is freaky. And, it's the whole thing is that you sink when you're depressed.
Yeah.
And when you're a child thinking about that, you're like, whoa.
Oh my goodness.
What's going on?
How old were you?
I don't even remember. I just remember looking at the really long flying dog and thinking, oh, that's cool.
That's what I want.
But yeah, I just, even nowadays, I'm just like, oh, what does a horse have to be that sad about?
Oh my goodness.
Oh well.
Yeah. Adam, what do you have for us?
Flying monkeys.
Flying monkeys.
I never got over them.
So you're talking about the Wizard of Oz?
I'm talking about the
right?
Wizard of Oz.
Now, doesn't that come before Star Wars? I thought that you were notorious for not having seen a movie before Star Wars.
Well, that feels like a bit of an exaggeration.
Apparently,
usually I'm the one exaggerating, so it's actually super fun to call you out on that. My experiential knowledge of that which comes after Star Wars is far greater than that which came before. But I remember seeing the Wizard of Oz on TV as a kid.
It was always showing on Thanksgiving.
And I was kind of transfixed by it until those flying monkeys showed up. And I have never watched it since.
You're kidding me.
I have not seen it end to end in one sitting. Now, have I probably seen most of it? A chunk here, a chunk there, probably. But I have not sat through it in one sitting because those monkeys, they wrecked me.
They are really creepy. The scene where the witch is standing by her window and you see all of them.
A horde.
Blanketing the skies.
Horde.
Yeah, that is
super creepy monkeys.
Yeah, you know what I also think is kind of creepy? The Oompa Loompas from the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
I just thought they were
Willy
weird.
Wonka and the Chocolate
Did they scare you though?
They did not scare me, but they were definitely freaky.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
the
the
orange
original
skin.
That whole movie is a little bit freaky.
Yeah.
It's a little off.
Yeah.
Sorry. I know it's a classic. Paul, what about you?
I'm going to choose a movie from the 1970s called
It's a good decade.
It was. We lived a lot of our lives in that
it's a good
decade.
decade.
Where the Lilies Bloom. It was
about
from
flowers.
No,
Dogs?
it is not. No, 1974. It is about this family who lives in the North Carolina mountains.
Oh, no.
Yes. Yes.
That is scary.
It is very. Well, this was really traumatizing because essentially the whole plot is this dad is raising his brood of children, and he is sick and he is dying, and he insists that he doesn't want any help. He doesn't want anybody to bury him. He doesn't want them to get any help at all because the government just takes their money. So he really wants them to be sort of on their own, and then he dies, and these kids are on their own. And I'll tell you what, it wasn't.
Ain't no
Do it.
boxcar children.
Tell us what.
It was to watch the dad sort of get sick and die. I was probably 4 years old at the time, and it was really traumatic. We were in Taos, New Mexico at the time. We were sitting in this drive-in theater. My parents were up front just watching, and I was in the back, and I was watching this dad just get sicker and sicker, and then he was just gone. And as a 4-year-old, thinking about your own parents just being gone and you being out on your own, I don't know who thought this was a really charming kid story.
Right?
It messed me up.
So can I do something that it's really obnoxious? I want to add one more.
You've never asked my permission before.
That's true. It's true. So, Land of the Lost.
Yes.
I had a love-hate relationship with Land of the Lost, which was a kid's show about a family that, goes down a waterfall and ends up in prehistoric times. You know what scared me? Sleestaks.
Oh, yeah.
These little alien guys that lived in these little pylon pod things, but I couldn't stop watching it.
Well, and that's the thing.
I loved it.
Yeah.
And it terrified me.
Well, I'll tell you what. I have a grandson now. He's 3 years old, and we actually just went to a museum of natural history up in Denver, and there is a huge creature that sort of roars, in sort of the prehistoric thing. And so you have to walk right beside him to get to the next area of the museum. And he has been terrified of that for a long time, but he's also just fascinated.
Right.
So he'll just stare around the corner and he'll look at it. Look at it, and then he starts crawling by, hoping that the weird statue creature won't see him, but it always roars anyway. And he runs back, and it's just terrible.
So we're not even into the meat of our conversation today, but I think you point out something psychologically that's really important, is that we can be really fascinated or even fixated on things that terrorize us. And I think it's probably a different podcast for a different time, but I think that's what horror movies tap into to some extent. But we're not really talking about horror movies today. We're really talking about what do we do when our kids get scared of something that, I didn't see that coming.
Well, and that's exactly
right.
That's sort of where I wanted to start the conversation today, because I think we all have moments like this in our own childhoods, in our kids' childhoods, where you're just watching something and you think it's completely innocent.
Right.
And something comes out of the blue.
Pee Wee Herman.
Pee Wee Herman's. That's another great example, right?
I'm going to resist the urge to do the voice.
Yeah, thank you very much. But we do have these moments that unexpectedly frighten our children. And what do we do with that? Now, Adam, I know that you have had some experience with that. You have 3 kids. Was there ever a time where a bit of entertainment really bothered one of them?
Yeah, couple of times. And one of them is with my youngest daughter. And we were on vacation. She was probably, 10-ish, somewhere in there. And we were staying at a bed and breakfast, and they had a bunch of movies. And we're like, let's put a movie in, right? So we put The Bear in, which is about a bear. But it starts with 2 bears, but it's just the bear.
Oh.
Right?
Oh.
And so Mama Bear dies in like the first 3 minutes of the movie.
And this is a G-rated movie, isn't
Oh
it?
yeah. Well, I don't know. We didn't make it very far. Yes, I think so. And it just wrecked my daughter. She starts just crying, and we're like, "What?" And she's like, "Is mom gonna die?"
Oh my
You know?
goodness,
And
yeah.
with her, one of the sensitivities we realized fairly early, although we missed that one, right? I'm like, I guess we're not watching that movie, is she would take things that she sees on screen and ask the question, is this going to happen to us?
Yeah.
And I've probably talked about it on a previous show somewhere. Same child, same thing. We went to see A Dog's Purpose, which is a lovely dog movie with Dennis Quaid and a dog named Bailey that keeps getting reincarnated. And I'm thinking, okay, this will be a chance to have a worldview conversation about reincarnation. It's a little bit odd, but it's pretty benign. I think we can handle it. And again, we get done and she's dead quiet. And I'm like, oh, was it hard watching that dog die over and over and over again? And she's like, no. Is our house going to burn down? And in the movie, the family's house accidentally burns down. I'm like, no, our house isn't going to burn down. And because she's probably going to be a prosecuting attorney at some point, she's like,
You don't know that.
how do you know?
Yeah.
Can you guarantee that? Well, no, you can't, can you? I'm like, all right, objection sustained, you know? And so again, just recognizing that things that weren't even necessarily scary
Yeah.
could trigger anxiety. And I think we live in such an anxiety-prone age. I wonder if that's more of an issue now than it used to be.
You know, I wonder if you're right. And just to riff off that a little bit, my daughter, we were watching just a documentary on volcanoes, and I think volcanoes are really cool.
Right.
They
And
spout
you know not to
lava.
get close to them.
You know not to get close to them, but she became really terrified of volcanoes. She was worried that she never ever wanted to go to Iceland. We had talked about maybe going to Iceland at one point in time. That was a no-go after that.
Yeah,
And
there's a similar thing, at least with my generation, was there were so many depictions of quicksand in media that everyone was like, oh, you got to be careful because one day you're going to run into quicksand. Never seen quicksand in
I
my
don't think
life.
there's quicksand anywhere. I think it's a total fabrication in Western movies.
But, you know, when I was growing up as a kid, it was always like, oh, man, quicksand. That's going to be a big problem. You know?
I hope there's a vine.
you know, it's interesting that you say that because when I was really, really little, I never wanted to go into a sandbox for that very reason. Never wanted to. I thought it could just suck me down. You just never know.
Well, and I think this is maybe a tiny bit of a tangent, but it helps us understand that the images and ideas that kids process, by the time you're an adult, you already have your frame of reference, right? You wouldn't necessarily identify it as something to be afraid of because you know what it is, right? It's a defined, known thing.
Yeah.
But if you're a child, some ideas and some images, it could be the first time you've seen them. And I think that we have to remember that especially young children, they process images and suggestions really differently. And even up to a certain age, they can't even differentiate between the reality on TV and reality in real life.
Well, and to make myself a fool again, I'll just say
Do
that
it.
there was a commercial about this. They had this really cool piece of gum, right, that had a liquid center.
Oh, yeah.
And you bit into it and it
loved
would
that.
squirt, but the commercials had it look like this water was just pouring into these rooms. And I was seriously terrified for a long time. I would never buy that gum, even though it looked kind of
'Cause
cool.
so much water's coming out.
Because
or
you
something.
never knew what it could do to our house. So I never, ever wanted that gum. Thankfully, they've banned it, probably for that very reason.
Yeah, I'm sure it caused cancer or something.
Of course. But
Turns out you were right to be afraid of it.
it turns out for an entirely different reason. But when you look at that, when you're talking about how kids process things differently than parents, you know, all kids process things differently, right? I know that there are probably most kids would have looked at that gum commercial and not been troubled by it at all. But every once in a while,
Little
you
Polly,
have a kid.
he
Yeah.
was a sensitive kid.
So as a parent, it's really important that you know your kid's own sensitivities, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. And 2 out of 3 of my kids weren't bothered a whit by Mama Bear dying. Like, they're not making the leap. If a bear dies in a movie, my mom could die. But my most anxiety-prone child made that leap.
Yeah.
And so even as we talk about whether movies are appropriate for your family or any kind of entertainment media, I think we need to get even more granular.
Right.
Because each of our kids has different personalities, different sensitivities, different needs and wants and trigger warnings and, all of that. And so there may not be a one-size-fits-all answer even for our families sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. So it seems like when we sort of take this conversation step by step, 1 is to know your kid. 2 is probably to protect them from unforeseen scares as much as possible, right? Plugged in can help with that on some level. Are there other things that parents, do you think, can do to sort of help protect their kids from seeing some of these things?
Yeah, I think it probably varies, like we've been saying, from kid to kid. There is something out there called the mean world syndrome, which is this kind of perceived cognitive bias that over a long time exposure to various media, like for instance, if you're watching a lot of media that contains a lot of violence, you might perceive that your real world is more violent than it actually is.
Interesting.
And so I think helping your kids walk through something like that, where, and to be clear, I'm not saying anything like, oh, well, video games make you violent or anything.
Right.
But there's certainly something to be said about this long-time exposure kind of distorting what you think reality actually is.
Right. So,
So to help with that, I think it's very helpful to get us grounded in certain ways. I mean, I grew up in a small town in Kansas. There wasn't violent crime really, but I was thinking in terms of James Bond and et cetera, et al. All the other action heroes, and you think, oh man, it's gonna be a big issue. It's the quicksand thing I talked about earlier.
Yeah.
And so I think it's one of those things where you just have to ground the conversation. Maybe put out some facts. Like in regards to houses burning down. It's statistically extremely unlikely. Yes, it could happen, and if it does happen, we'll deal with that.
You're in far more danger if we're just driving around. Oh, wait, that wasn't helpful either.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's we were having a conversation earlier this morning about shark attacks.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, we're afraid of sharks because we know that they could eat us.
Right.
But the statistical chance of that happening is so small that people still go to the ocean. People still swim in the ocean.
Yeah. And it's very much smaller here in Colorado.
Oh,
We
yeah.
just don't have
Very little chance of being
Very
bitten
little
by
chance.
a shark here.
Yes, I mean, we're moving to California and shark country, but
So
I
your
know
chances
that,
go up.
shockingly, my child who's afraid of the house burning down and Mama Bear dying is also voted least likely to want to go in the ocean because of sharks and because we have been lifelong Shark Week aficionados. So it's come back to bite us, I guess.
As it were. Yeah. And that's a really interesting point about what you're talking about in terms of that exposure to violence makes you think that it's a more violent world. The exposure to violence makes it seem like it's a more violent world. The exposure to sharks makes it feel like it's a more shark-infested world, right? So maybe some of the same tools that we're talking about generally when we're talking about media discernment, keeping your kids away from that violence, that might be a way to sort of help alleviate some of that, to make it feel like the world is a less threatening place.
Yes, or at the very least, like putting it in context of, no, this is a movie. It's very unlikely that we're going to have to deal with what Jack Bauer goes through on a 24-hour period.
Right, right.
I have so many thoughts on this. Can I share a couple more?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think on one hand, I don't want my children traumatized, right? I don't want them wrecked by something. On the other hand, part of life and part of parenthood is sometimes things slip through the net, right? And I think there's also on the other side, I want my kids to be resilient.
Right.
And so I think there's a balance there between, I want to take reasonable precautions to help my kids in this area. And I also want to be there when something happens that's scary, because again, our response as adults is to have a rational conversation about the thing that scares them, but they're not having a rational response, right? They're having an emotional response to an image or to an idea. And so sometimes I need to resist my fatherly urge to, mansplain why that's not going to happen.
Sure.
And just say, okay, tell me a little bit more about why that's affecting you so much emotionally. And just really letting our kids know that we want to know what's going on with them emotionally. And I think that gives us a ground to maybe have that further conversation.
Well, I think that's a really good point, because in some ways, when we think about these issues of fright, of fear, when you see these elements that are legitimately scary, I mean, a house burning down, that's frightening. The movie space, the television space, if the parents are in the room, gives kids an opportunity to talk through some of those fears.
Right.
And it gives you as a mom and dad the opportunity to speak into those fears and to, reassure them when you can, but also just to talk through it. Because I know when I was a kid, even just talking through some of those issues, it made a huge difference in setting those fears aside.
Yeah. Well, and I think as a child, part of the safety that comes from a healthy home is knowing that within reason, mom and dad have it relatively under control.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I can't categorically promise my youngest daughter that the house is never going to burn down, but we can talk about God's goodness. We can talk about trusting him with the things that scare us. I've heard it said many, many times, scripture says there are 365, uses of don't be afraid. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but I have heard it enough times that I think it's true. But, one for every day of the year, that fear is one of the great spiritual enemies. And Jesus invites us to trust him.
I know you're making a spiritual point, but I gotta. You really
How
just
far
made me
off is
think
it?
about Dune right now.
Oh, okay. Fear is the mind
Fear is
killer.
the mind
Yeah,
killer.
fear is the little death. Yes. I love that quote,
Yeah.
clearly. Because I think that also in our culture of safety and control,
Right.
like we can coddle our kids so much that when they get out in the real world, they have a hard time.
Yeah.
And there's lots of scary stuff in the real
Right.
world. And this is a
Right.
bigger jump than this conversation, but I want to strike that balance between empathetic, but helping them be resilient too.
No, and I think that's a great thing. We've been talking about these movies with these scary elements. Sometimes sometimes we don't want our kids watching those scary things, or sometimes we don't realize they're scary until it's too late.
Right.
But those can often be something that's actually helpful to go through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like, I'll bring up another example. I was watching a movie when I was little called Monster House, and the animation's already kind of creepy.
Yep.
But there's this scene where basically this house kind of has this spiritual presence in it, and we see a backstory of this lady. When they were building the house, she was being terrorized by these kids, and she got so angry and she lost her balance, fell 2 stories into the basement and dies.
Oh my goodness.
And then I don't know why they decide to. I think she pours concrete on herself so she gets trapped in there. Yeah, and I'm like, well, this
So
is kids.
it's basically Edgar Allan Poe territory.
And that freaked me out when I was a kid. I think it would freak out a lot of kids. But it made me start to think a lot more about that kind of okay, well, I'm never going to encounter a monster house probably.
Right.
But it made me think about this idea of love and death, because that's kind of what the whole movie is about. And it made me really think about these a little more deeply.
Yeah.
Perhaps that I wouldn't have had I not. Now, there's a quote that we always bring up on this show that I'll bring up again from G.K. Chesterton.
Oh, yeah.
Chesterton.
In which he
Chesterton.
says that fairy tales, this is in response to essentially whether or not we should let our kids read fairy tales. And
Because they can sometimes be scary.
yeah,
right?
they can. Big Bad Wolf, you have Hansel and Gretel. These are
Dragons.
some pretty freaky things.
Well,
and
most
G.K.
of them
Chesterton,
back in the day,
Yeah.
somebody died.
and he says, fairy tales do not give the child his first idea of bogey. What fairy tales give the child is his first clear idea of the possible defeat of Bogey. The baby has known the dragon intimately ever since he has had an imagination. What the fairy tale provides for him is a St. George to kill that dragon.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
A couple of thoughts on that, because that reminds me a little bit of what you were talking about with the flying monkeys. The flying monkeys are terrifying, but the Wizard of Oz talks about how these 4 companions go and they can conquer the evil that the flying monkeys represent.
I should watch this movie.
You really should.
And not only conquer the evil, but also conquer these parts of themselves that they think are holding them back.
Exactly. It has some beautiful lessons on how to deal with fear. We have the cowardly lion who is known for being fearful. And you have these elements where they conquer these elements within themselves.
Yeah, and I wish we could have this conversation with Adam.
Yeah, since he doesn't know anything about the Wizard of Oz, it would be nice. But the other thing I was thinking of...
Try to watch it by the next show.
Just as we were talking about it, it reminded me again of my grandson by that weird beastie thing that he was scared of and he wanted to crawl by. He was fascinated, repulsed, terrified. Me reassuring him that it wasn't real wasn't going to work in that moment. But what did work is me holding him, allowing him to press his head against my shoulder, walk past it really quickly. And he did that so well. When you know that you have people with you who can walk you through those fears, I think it makes those fears easier to deal with. And that's a role of mom and dad, right, in their kids' lives.
Yeah, I think it's the same general idea behind like nightmares. Nightmares are, they aren't real. They're things that you have dreamed these things up, but your parents don't go, "That's not real. Go to bed."
Well,
and
some of them do.
There's an element of like, there's no bogeyman under your bed. There's nothing in the closet.
Check the closet, check the bed, all that.
At least with my parents, in those times when I did have a nightmare, I'd go to their bedroom and they'd let me sleep in between them. Even though they're like, "No, there's no 7-foot tall, faceless man in your closet." Which sorry if we have any kids listening. I've just given them a new fear. But,
Right?
Yeah, it sounds like that comes from a place of experience. I'm just saying.
Oh, yeah. But, there was that emotional comfort that even if it's not real, man, it felt real to me.
Yeah.
And it's helpful to know that my parents are there to support me.
Yeah. And when we think about this a little bit more broadly, when we think about the fears that we deal with, kids have their moms and dads to help protect them. And we adults have fears too. And we know who we lean on when we experience those fears. It doesn't mean that the fears aren't real. They can be very real. And sometimes they are figments of our imagination. But we know we have someone who is stronger than anything that we might face. And that's an important thing to remember, I think.
And that seems like a pretty good place to maybe stick the landing with this conversation, don't you think?
I kind of think so.
Not to grab the wheel right at the end, but
well,
that was a lovely concluding thought, it felt like.
Yes, entertainment can be a frightening place, but we have tools to help you navigate it. And we'd like to tell you about one right now.
Hello, Master. Welcome to the mansion of pop culture. Won't you come in? That's right. Climb up those old porch steps and be careful of the cat, mind the spider webs, and pay no attention to the rats in the corner. He's friendly enough, as long as he's fed. No. The real terrors of this place hide in the shadows, up in the attic, down in the basement, perhaps behind you! If you really plan to spend time here, be sure you have your wooden stake, a good collection of silver bullets, and most important of all, your copy of Becoming a Screen-Savvy Family. It comes packed with information on how to navigate the frightening corridors of entertainment, technology, and pop culture. Sure, you might need to read it by the light of the full moon, but trust me, it's worth it. And it's great for fending off monsters under the beds, too. Just pop 'em on the head with it. Oh, and you don't need to spend an arm and a leg for your very own copy. We just need a gift of any amount. Go to the Plugged In Show homepage and check out this episode's show notes to find out more. No strings or ropes or webs attached. Armed with becoming a screen-savvy family, the monsters in this pop culture madhouse don't have a ghost of a chance.
Thank you, Mr. Hoos. And now we are going to go to our second segment. And for that, I'm actually going to toss the hosting keys, which you sort of wrested away from me at the very end.
I pried them out of your cold, well, not so dead fingers.
Not so dead fingers. So why don't you go ahead and just keep the wheel.
Okay.
Keep driving.
I'll keep driving.
And we'll talk about exhibiting forgiveness.
Except while I'm driving, it's hard to drive and talk at the same time. So I'll have to ask you some questions.
Right. Fair enough.
So Exhibiting Forgiveness is a movie that is out, and it seems like it's a little bit of an odd kettle of fish. It deals with...
Well, especially for us to talk about here.
Yeah. It deals with some family dynamics and unresolved hurts, I think it's safe to say. But Paul, you have seen it.
Yes.
And it sounds like we have a lot to talk about. So tell me about just the plot of the movie and set it up for us.
We really do. So the central character in this story is a guy named Terrell. He is a famous painter. He's known for a lot of his work that expresses times really within his past. He deals with a lot of his broken childhood in his paintings. It's interesting that we've been talking about childhood fears. Terrell, as a child, had a lot to be fearful of, and the number one thing that he was scared of was his dad.
Ooh.
His father was a crack addict. He was a workaholic. And you see those elements of his life in flashbacks where he makes Terrell work just as hard as he does for the money that his father, Laron, actually uses to buy crack.
Ooh.
And so that's sort of where the story begins. This reality is sort of unpacked slowly. But we come back to the present time. Terrell, his life is all together. He is married, has a really cute little kid, but he needs to bring his mom back home with him for whatever reason. And when he's coming back to help move his mother arranges a surprise reunion with his estranged father, who he hasn't talked
without telling him.
Without talking to him. Hasn't talked with him in 15 years. Laron is now reformed. He says he's a changed man. He has been clean from crack for a long time. He's praying. He's going to church. He carries his Bible everywhere. Yes.
Awakening.
And Terrell's mother is deeply spiritual as well. We hear a lot about God and forgiveness within this movie. And so it becomes sort of this battle between Laron and Terrell, and whether Terrell is actually going to forgive his father for everything that he experienced as a child.
So this sounds like a Christian movie, but is it?
It's Christian adjacent. Now, My understanding is the director. It's a semi-autobiographical picture, and the director, who is also a famous artist, he is also a Christian.
Okay.
And a number of people within the cast are Christian as well. It deals with faith very honestly, and I think, and fairly. Now, the main character is not particularly Christian, and we see that those elements come out. So it has a lot that Christians can unpack. It has a lot that they can talk about, but it is also rated R. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that R rating is just because of language. We hear a lot of foul language throughout the movie.
So that brings up just so many questions for me, because I think sometimes as Christians, you'll be talking to other believers about Christian movies, and they'll say, well, it's just a little too pat. It's a little too clean. It's a little too sanitized, too neat. This doesn't feel like that kind of movie. And yet, that content potentially means it's not something that a lot of people are going to want to see. And there's a tension there, isn't there,
There
Paul?
really is. There really is a tension. I mean, you could see how this story would go in quote unquote your typical Christian movie. And
Right.
in fairness, let's just say the Christian movies I think are getting better and better.
Yeah, and I'm
They're
not trying to
dealing
throw
with-
them under the bus in their entirety, but I think sometimes we do dial all that content back, and we have it here.
We do dial that content back, and we even dial the positive messages up in a way
Yep.
that this movie doesn't. You know how this story would go if it was in a sort of that Christian filmmaking environment. There would be forgiveness. The violins would be playing at the end. There would be hugs, and there would just be this beautiful reunion, and that would be wonderful. But this movie doesn't do that. It is very gritty, both in terms of its themes and in terms of its content.
Well, now I know a couple of years ago we kind of had a similar issue with Father Stew. How would you say this kind of lines up with the content from Father Stew? Is it better, worse, about the same?
That's a really great question. I think the content is actually better, a little bit more. There's a lot of language here,
Yeah.
but there was a lot of language in Father Stew. There was a ton of it, and
In the first cut, which was rated
In the
R,
first
and then
cut.
they edited it to a PG-13 cut.
throttled it way back. Yeah, the first cut was very harsh, and that was in fairness to Mark Wahlberg, who was behind the production. It was kind of the reality in which he sort of grew up, right? This feels very much of the same piece where the language. Let me just preface this by saying I don't necessarily think there's ever an excuse, quote unquote, for foul language coming into this, but it did feel very natural, very germane. It didn't feel like it was just thrown in
Yeah.
to shock. It felt very much a part of these characters' lives.
Well, I think the other thing that we sometimes see with Christian movies is that neat resolution. And even just talking with you a little bit before the podcast, it sounds like maybe we don't quite get that here. Is that without spoiling the ending completely.
Yeah, and we don't want to spoil it. There's a lot of wrinkles to this, but I think fair wrinkles, that quote unquote Christian Pat ending isn't necessarily realistic or even desirable in some cases, because when we have really difficult people in our lives who have hurt us, who we know can still hurt us, there's an element where we can say, I forgive you, but I'm not going to necessarily, let you back into my life. This is not an invitation for Sunday dinners.
Right.
And I think that that's realistic. I think that when we're talking about, sometimes the people who we need to forgive are still not people who it's advisable to let in day to day in our lives. And this movie sort of gets at that truth.
And the messy reality of forgiveness, right? I
Right,
think
yeah.
forgiveness is one of those topics that when I hear about it in the abstract, I'm like, man, what a great ethic.
Yeah.
What a great way to live. Right up until the moment somebody really does me wrong.
Right.
And if they're not repentant, and the bigger the wrong is, it's human nature to say, I don't want to forgive this person for that.
Yeah.
I want to hold on to my anger, my righteous indignation. And I haven't seen the film, but it sounds like this kind of deals with that a little bit as well.
Well, and you think about how we feel when we get angry, right? We feel powerful.
Exactly.
In some ways. We feel righteous anger that we are right. This person wronged us, and we want to hang on to that. We want that person to suffer.
Yep.
That's just human
And
nature.
to let go of that is to let go of our sense of power, even though it's misguided.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to see the main character Terrell walk through this, because as he's been dealing with nightmares for most of his adult life. I mean, these terrifying nightmares where he can barely breathe because of all the burdens that he's carrying from his childhood. And we see that walk, that desire of so many other people to have him forgive because they know it would help him, and his desire to hang on to that anger as long as he can. And he even says at one point when he talks to his wife, he says, when he talks about how weird it was to see his father, he says, the time when I thought you were going to be meeting my father for the first time is when he was in his casket.
Yep.
And that's what he wanted. And now he sees this live person in front of him that he must confront, and it's really fascinating.
And he kind of ironically feels robbed even
Exactly.
further.
Exactly. It's an interesting movie. Again, let me just caution, there's some really hard R content here. It's not for everybody, but for adults, I think it might be a movie that can unpack a lot of interesting conversations.
And of course, you can find Paul's complete review at pluggedin.com, and we'll give you a link in the episode notes for today's show.
That is correct.
Right?
Exactly.
Anything else we need to say
No,
about
I think that pretty much
exhibiting
does it.
forgiveness?
And I forgive you for taking control of the show.
Twice.
I know.
Sorry.
Well, now we're
Bad
moving
habit.
on to a game where there's no forgiveness. So
There's only aggression.
Let's do a segue into the game. This is actually you did a great job with that, Kennedy. Yes, we're inaugurating a new game. This is a creation by our own Kennedy Unthank. So
Who's a master gamer.
Who is a master gamer? He has how many board games do you have in your house?
probably too many for someone to have.
You
A
have like
number so
whole
big
room.
he doesn't want to admit it out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's
Or doesn't
one of
know
those
the
things
answer.
where you're like, oh yeah, this is my hobby, but I don't want to tell you about it.
I understand that.
My Lego hobby is a little like that. So anyway, this is a game that you have kind of sort of created. And we are inaugurating it for the very first time. And I know that it involves a lot of fighting, which is one of the reasons why I'm really super excited about it.
Yeah, so we're just preemptively going to call this Showdown. Essentially, in this plugged-in cup, I've got a lot of names of famous characters from movies, TV shows, video games, characters that most people should know. Each of you are going to draw one of them, and you are going to each have a minute to explain
minute?
why your
luxury.
character would beat the other character in a fight. Maybe it's a physical fight, a battle of the wits. Maybe they're just deciding who's going to be the leader of their little duo. But
Well, my character is.
you have to convince me. And if you draw someone and maybe you think, oh, I've already lost, I don't want you to have that attitude. I want you to have
Thanks,
every...
Dad.
I want you to have every single notion, put everything on the line, genuinely believe your character can win. You have to fight for your
Sell it?
character. Yes. You need to sell it. But you're not selling it to each other. At the end of this, I will choose which of you has convinced me.
And is it a qualitative or a quantitative or both?
it
It's
might
just
be both.
whatever Kennedy decides. Whoever is most
This
convincing.
is next level.
And
is next
the
level.
important thing for both of you to realize is that if you forget something, I'm not going to factor in that in my decision making. So I'm only going to factor what you say here in your minute. Now, as stated before, you will each get a minute, and then you will have a final minute after each of you have gone to offer any rebuttals that you might want.
Oh, I love that part.
Yes, a free for all.
And
So,
I'm
Paul?
not giving you any hints today, okay?
Okay.
Paul, how about you draw a name
Okay.
and
So
read
do
it?
I say this out loud?
Yes, read it aloud.
Okay. All right. Syndrome. Incredibles.
Yeah.
Adam, oh, he's so far away.
Sold the shoulder joint. Oh. Charles Muntz, the villain from Up.
Oh my goodness! So it's a battle of Pixar.
Yeah, Battle of Pixar Villains.
Wow.
All right, Paul, are you ready?
All right, I am ready.
You have 1 minute. Go.
All right, so Syndrome would clearly win because he is much younger, number one, than Mr. Muntz. He
Really?
is
Ageism.
total ageism. No, he has that really cool spiky hair, and he's a fantastic inventor. He creates these really powerful creations. I don't think Mr. Muntz really does a lot of that. It seems like he has definitely a little bit of an edge in terms of his creativity, his scientific know-how. He would kick Mr. Muntz's can, I believe, And that is not the only thing that we need to worry about, because he is a jilted one-time superhero lover himself, and because he feels like he was wronged in that world. He has the power of revenge. He wants revenge not only on the superhero world, not only on Mr. Incredible.
All right, that's all.
Man, that was the longest minute in history.
All right, Adam, you may offer your evidence. 1 minute. Go.
So Charles Muntz is the villain from Up, and Up, of course, is about an old guy and a kid who take a hot air balloon ride to something falls in South
Paradise
America.
Falls.
Paradise Falls. Thank you for that. And they find Charles Muntz. Charles Muntz has created this invention that allows dogs to talk to each other, which is quite lovely, frankly.
Well, it is pretty cool.
And you know, there's a Doberman with a really funky voice, and it's funny. And these dogs are, you know, they chase down our heroes, and I think Charles Muntz has a big blimp. I'm reasonably certain there's a blimp involved.
Yes, that's correct.
Full disclosure, I haven't seen Up in about 10 years, so this is a pretty deep dive for me. He's got a good German last name, Muntz. And, you know, he's how can you not love a villain this villainous, right? I think I win.
I think you lose. I don't think we need to go any farther.
I don't know that there's much rebuttal necessary here. Although watching Paul's gears turn, remember Syndrome was nothing like mine grinding to a complete halt.
Because I was struggling to think, okay, what does Syndrome do? Because it's been a while since I've seen The Incredibles.
Right.
Too.
No, it was a fair fight.
It was a fair fight, but you definitely lost.
Well,
Let
I
me
was
just
funnier.
say. Well,
I mean, I was ready for your minute to be up.
No. Oh my goodness, that's harsh, man.
Well, you just kept talking and talking. Now I know how you feel when I'm telling a story.
What do you think you do all the time?
Karma.
we've
Actually,
got-
not real. Karma's
we've
not
gone
real.
Straight from Mr. Muntz and Syndrome to let's let just Adam and Paul insult
So
each other.
here's what we should do. For real. When we have this happen, when neither one of us are necessarily experts, it's not like we did Darth Vader versus Voldemort, which would have been an interesting throwdown and perhaps more spirited. We ought to both go watch our movies and come back and have a rematch because, well, I didn't have much. Kennedy, what say ye?
You know, I thought you both made some pretty compelling points.
Yeah, the dog voices were just so adorable. That's a winning argument right there.
I gotta say, based on the stuff you put forward, both of you, I think I have to give it to Paul.
I think so. I would give it to Paul.
I think
it was not a
Adam,
long
you made a good point about the dogs. I think the dogs and the blimp could certainly give you a
I will
competitive
take
edge,
the participation point at this point.
but I'm not sure
Yeah.
that Charles Muntz is as
Yeah.
smart as
Well,
Syndrome.
he is old. Let's be honest.
Now, you said that already. We don't need to replay the game. I've lost, okay? Take your W and go.
Oh man, I tell
That
you
was
what.
pretty fun, Kennedy.
Yeah.
I mean, even failing it was fun.
Thanks.
I mean, failure is fun in its own way, too.
I always think arguing is just so much fun, especially arguing with you, Adam. So
Yes. Well, glad you got to win. Good
thank
for you, Paul.
both so much for joining us today on the Plugged In Show. Thank you, listeners and viewers, for listening to us and watching us. It was great to connect with you, and we would love for you to connect with us as well. We would love for you to talk about what movies scared you as a kid, what scares your kids, and how do you deal with it. And we'll just go a little bit more philosophical too. Is there someone in your life who you feel could use forgiveness? So be sure to let us know on Facebook, Instagram, leave us a voicemail on our Plugged In Show homepage, send us an email at team@thepluggedinshow.com, and be sure to listen to us next week on The Plugged In Show.